Um, Hi, thank you so much for joining us this evening for our Historic Neighborhoods of Indianapolis series. I'm Liz Ellis, the Executive Director here at the Indianapolis Propoleum. If you have questions for Gary at the end of the program or during the program, if you could type them in the chat feature at the side or at the bottom, that would be great. The Propoleum was founded in 1888 by renowned suffragist and activist May Wright Sewell as a place where women and women's groups could meet and share ideas. We carry on that tradition today through our mission as the place that connects and celebrates women. Our mission focus is women's leadership, arts and culture, and historic preservation. As a nonprofit, we count on your support to provide engaging programming like tonight. Please take a look at our website, www.thepropoleum.org, for all of our upcoming virtual events and to support the Propoleum. We hope that you'll join us in person at the Propoleum. Very soon, we're hoping we'll be able to get back together again. Our program tonight is brought to you, or our presenter tonight is Gary Chilufo. He is the owner, creative director, and photographer at Chilufo Media. Gary received his professional training from Rhode Island School of Photography and Winona School of Professional Photography. He's originally from the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains in New York State, and he's been an Indianapolis-based commercial photographer since 1976. Gary's noted for his architectural and advertising photography for the design print industry. He shoots for business and consumer magazines and other advertising media. Gary is the past president of HUNY, the Historic Urban Neighborhoods of Indianapolis, and the past president of St. Joseph's Historic District. Ladies and gentlemen, Gary Chilufo.
Okay, all right. Well, sorry for that little glitch. You know, technology, it's great when it works. Liz, thank you. I'd like to thank the Propoleum for hosting this series. And it's my pleasure to present the St. Joe neighborhood tour tonight. So let's get started. All right, I'm going to take you through a little bit of a story here of what I found in the 1980s. This is what the neighborhood, the St. Joe neighborhood, looked like in the early 1980s. This shows a direct impact on historic neighborhoods of the devastation that was left by the construction of the interstate. Now, yes, there were other factors contributing to the downslide of the neighborhood in general, but the interstate was that final nail in the coffin as it sliced through the neighborhoods. This is what we were left with. A lot of open vacant land that the city had demolished a lot of the housing stock. So that's what I came to find when I came to St. Joe. When I found St. Joe, this is what I saw. Not every building was boarded up, but quite a few. So not to leave you in a depressed state, we'll give you kind of a lighter fare of what the neighborhood looks today, and it's grown reasonably well and flourished living next to the interstate. So St. Joe is an urban mix of business and residential. It's a transitional neighborhood directly north of the Mile Square, between the commercial core and the residential neighborhoods to the north. 23, now 24 properties are listed individually on the National Register of Historic Places. And our architecture history spans nearly every decade since the Civil War, including a rare concentration of historic rowhouses. If you don't know what a rowhouse means in today's vernacular, that would be a townhouse. Some people know brownstone, and this was dense housing in like New York and Boston and Baltimore. So we've come a long way. we've flourished in spite of the interstate. So where is St. Joe located? I'll start with our northern boundary is I-65 to the north, Pennsylvania Street to the west, and Fort Wayne and Central to the east. We were listed on the federal National Register in 1990, and we were designated a local historic district in 1991. I do feel like St. Joe has a little bit of a badge of honor that we brought legislation to the city to help historic neighborhoods keep what they have, because in St. Joe, because in the 80s, demolition was occurring practically every day. They would just show up and just the bulldozer would take a building and be gone in 2 hours. So with our instigation, with the help of the city, a 3-day moratorium on demolition was instituted. That helped us and the city negotiate with the owner. The other important, which became, I guess you'd call it an ordinance, was minimum maintenance standards. We had a lot of investor types that owned a lot of the houses or housing stock in St. Joe. And they were just sitting on it and letting basically demolition by neglect happen. And so with the minimum maintenance standards, which is still in place today, you are required to keep a tight, dry roof and keep the windows boarded. And so those are because of our challenges in St. Joe in the mid-80s. Before we leave this slide, I got one other story to tell you. You're looking at all these plats of land or plots of land. The Catholic diocese owned some of this land that you see in front of you. This is 19th century. And they were going to build a school or thinking of building a school. And the priest that was on the ground here was Father Sorens. And he basically managed the property acquisition, and then the diocese decided they were not going to build the school here. And so Sorens was tasked to basically sell off all of the land as it got platted out. And his name was Sorens. So if you go to your property tax record information, and if you see the term or words sub Sorens, that relates to Father Sorens of the Catholic diocese land. I mention this because the Catholic diocese then moved their money from the sale of property up to South Bend, and they started Notre Dame. So we could have had Notre Dame right here in downtown Indianapolis. I'd like to start with a couple of historic photos. I love looking at this one. This is the historic White Castle number 3. It was built in 1927. This is a very early version of White Castle buildings, 1925 to 28. This is built in 27. It's the oldest White Castle intact, and it's one of 6 remaining that are built with this enameled brick. But I understand that we probably have the one that's most intact and the one that's most viable. Today, it is a hair salon and spa, but I will tell you that Landmarks had purchased the building for $1 from a previous owner, and we're trying to remarket it. And there were a lot of possible buyers, and they all pondered some kind of restaurant. Well, lo and behold, on the, I guess, the deed, there is a restriction of no restaurants. So White Castle would not waive the no restaurant restriction. And so all those restaurant ideas went out the window. And hence we have the hair salon today. I wanted to bring this one up. Everyone knows about the infamous Jim Jones. This is the Indianapolis Hebrew Congregation Building. It sits or sat at the corner of Delaware and 10th Street, southeast corner. It's a big building, but to really see how big and mammoth this building is, that's how it towered over 1- and 2-story buildings in the area. So Jim Jones, he ministered to the homeless in the 50s, and he took his flock to California, and then from there to Guyana. So from the Indy Star, it says that Jones, who was born in Indiana, started his ministry in the early 1950s in Indianapolis. He first appears in the Indianapolis Star's archives in 1953, when he was a student pastor at Somerset Methodist Church on the South Side. In 1955, Jones started his own congregation here in this building, naming it the People's Temple. And of course, we know that he goes off to Guyana in 1978, the mass murder suicide, and killing 900 of his followers. It is a vacant lot today. When Jones left Indianapolis, there are eyewitness accounts of those who lived on the street at that time, that they were going out the back, unloading or loading all of this office equipment out the back door. And when they left, there was a big fireball and that building just went down to the ground. And so that's how Jim Jones left Indianapolis. Okay, so starting our little tour, we're going to start with the Kemper House. Many of you know the Kemper House. It's at 1028 North Delaware. It was built by Charles Pearson in 1873 as a wedding present to his wife. And stylistically, it's a lot going on there. It's an eclectic Victorian, and as the historic district plan says, an architectural confection of Second Empire and Greek forms. We affectionately call it the wedding cake house. So its history is Eli Lilly purchased this house in 1962, restored it. He donated it to the Episcopal Diocese in Indianapolis, and dedicated it to the Reverend Jackson Kemper, who was a pioneer Episcopal bishop to Indiana. In 1977, the Episcopal Diocese granted the title to Indiana Landmarks, or at that time was known as Historic Landmarks. And so this is owned by this is owned by Indiana Landmarks, and it is the home of Indiana Landmarks President Marsh Davis and his wife, Grace. It's a beautiful building. 1031 North Penn. If you're getting on the interstate, you drive by this house all the time on the north side. This is the Dr. Kelvin I Fletcher III house. It was built in 1895. It's a wonderful example of Queen Anne with the balconies, the towers, the turrets, and the projecting bays. Now, he was the grandson and namesake of Kelvin I Fletcher, who was the prominent banker, AFNB, American Fletcher Bank, and state legislator. The young Kelvin kept a detailed diary, so detailed that he wrote out the weather for every single day that he was writing in the diary. Later that got published by the Indiana Historical Society, and they still use that diary for information. He trained as a medical doctor. He was a world traveler, and he was a prolific photographer. At his death, at the time of his death, there were over 40,000 negatives in his files. So tragically, he died doing what he loved, but in 1913, an avalanche in Glacier National Park. For our mid-century modern enthusiasts, this is the headquarters was the headquarters for the National Retail Hardware Association at 964 North Penn, 964 North Penn. That would be Pennsylvania and 10th Street. This would be the southwest corner in 1951. It's a good example of the international style, the mid-century modern movement. Limestone frame and a polished granite facade. National Retail Hardware Association occupied it from 52 through 1970s. Today, as you see the logo on the side of the building, HVAF, Hoosier Vets Foundation, they're a stellar program helping homeless vets return to self-sufficiency. Merry old England right here in St. Joe. This is the Manchester Apartments and the Sheffield Inn. It was a restaurant and a quaint English pub with 125 rooms. Built circa 1927, Tudor revival. You look very closely at those windows next to the single door. They're leaded framed diamond shaped panes. Today, this house is actually the apartments for HVAF for the homeless. Well, I guess you wouldn't call them homeless anymore, but the vets who are in with their program. I'm going to take one digression here. We're going to go directly across the street to the Necedah block. It's 4 storefronts, and by the way, it was the Sears Roebuck catalog sales from the 1960s to the 70s. It's 4 storefronts. But if you walk behind this building, you will see this. And this is the carriage house from the 19th century house that sat on the building in front. Indianapolis Paper Bag Company operated out of this for years. This matches the house that would have been in the front. And it is purported to be the Vonnegut home where Kurt Vonnegut was born. Shortly after they downsized and moved up to Illinois Street. Now, for the academics out there, that is not official, but that's kind of what the word on the street. So we're going down south down Pennsylvania Street just a little bit to the corner of Penn and St. Joseph Street. And this is at 927 North Penn. And it was built for the Salvation Army in 1981. And today it is Volunteers of America. They have a community corrections program for women there. I wanted to show this site because this is, as far as we know in the neighborhood, is the historic site of May Wright Sewell's Girls Classical School from 1882. As most of you would know, she was a suffragist, an activist, an educator, and founded Indianapolis Propylaeum. So as my reading had said, it's located on Pennsylvania Street, just north of what is now Central Library. And somewhere I had read that it was the southeast corner. So either this corner or the next, but this is the area where the Girls Classical School was. The classical school for boys, by the way, was on the northwest corner of Alabama and North Streets. I love this building. Okay, so this is the Albert Metzger building, built in 1916 at 924 North Penn. It was built as the auto showroom, but it's otherwise known as Rollerland to most of Indianapolis, and it was in operation from 1941 to 1970s. So the famed architecture from Robish and Hunter built or designed this building with this distinctive decorative terracotta facade. It's absolutely pristine and incredible and in great shape. Today, of course, the Arts Council and the Gallery 24 and the Cabaret occupy this building. So I'm showing these 3 apartment buildings we're just a little south at the corner of 9th and Pennsylvania. So the one on the left is the Pennsylvania in 1906. The middle one is the Plaza. The Plaza is a wonderful design building. It's Beaux-Arts. It's got a lot of classical details. It has this European courtyard in the middle because it's a U-shaped apartment building. The U-shape and the courtyard is facing 9th Street. Worth taking a look. 1907. On the far right is the Ambassador, Romanesque and Art Nouveau details. These buildings were all constructed because of the development that was coming north from the Mile Square going north. And I have to mention that the St. Joe neighborhood, historic neighborhood, and the Ambassador have a relationship. This was the proposed building to move it off the block over to Meridian Street to make way for the entrance to the garage for the new central library going in, or the addition. Our argument was, back then, you take away that building from this corner and it's a missing tooth in the historic fabric. And so we were adamant in not letting this building move from this location. I should add that it also happened to be that the building going to the proposed site, the owner didn't want to sell, and the building was larger than the site. And how we're going to work that out, I don't know. But anyway, we won that one, kept the Ambassador right where it is, and it's right next to the addition of the Central Library. And I think it works beautifully. By the way, this edition of the Central Library, I think most people know, was was designed by our famed local modernist architect, Evans Woolen. Okay, great little story here. This is the Cathcart. It's located at 9th and Penn. It's 103 East 9th Street. And a young woman all the way to an older woman lived here named Charlotte Cathcart. She had a nickname of Pink. All of her friends called her Pink. So Charlotte Pink Cathcart, and she lived here at Penn, Pennsylvania, and then was known as Pratt Street. Now it's known as 9th Street. The interesting thing is Charlotte wrote a manuscript at some point called Indianapolis from Our Old Corner. And it's about her recollections of early Indianapolis. The Indiana Historical Society published this manuscript in 1965. It's a year after her death, but it's become an invaluable source of information. So fast forward to 2015, you'll notice on the right-hand side this mural, which is the building just to the north of the Cathcart. It was produced by the Arts Council of Indianapolis, and I apologize to the artist. I do not remember her name, just didn't come back to me. But this depicts Charlotte, a resident of the neighborhood from the late 19th century to mid 20th century. It illustrates an open book at the top, and the words and letters are falling down, and those letters are swirling around and creating her dress. By the way, this building that you see was a former Kroger, and then Dazza Pizza, which the sign is on the wall. I thought that was an interesting little story. It's a great book if you can find it. Obviously, it's out of print. You'd have to find a used copy. All right, we're moving a little over to the east, to Delaware, 907 North Delaware. Unity Center, 1955. It's the non-denominational church affiliated with the Unity School of Christianity. So it's a modern style building. It's faced in smooth limestone. The south on the right-hand side, the southernmost portion for office space was erected in 1955. And the northern portion, in 1964, they constructed the 480-seat sanctuary and outer lobby. This is a gem in our neighborhood. This is the Balls Walker House. It's built in 1869. It sits at 951 North Delaware. So we're at Delaware and St. Joe, northeast corner. Balls Walker. So Charles Balls, he was a German immigrant who developed a prosperous wholesale liquor business. And upon his death, it passed to his daughter, Mrs. John Walker. So Balls Walker House. Walker, by the way, is W-O-C-H-E-R. But this house illustrates the exuberant, high style Italianate, incredible on the outside, absolutely incredible on the inside. It is one of the few remaining reminders that Delaware Street was an avenue of large upscale residences. For most of the 20th century, rather, for most of the 20th century, it was a mortuary, the Heisey and Titus mortuary. The holding room for customers remains intact in the basement. The law firm, by the way, today it is the law offices of Christie, Farrell, Lee, and Bell, and they'd be happy to show you that in the basement level. Now, walking directly to our east is the Hilker House at 214 East St. Joseph Street, built in 1863. Now, this housed a florist business and a greenhouse, Henry Hilker's City Flower Garden. Henry Hilker was a gardener at the Indiana Blind Asylum when it was located at what is now the American Legion Mall. His greenhouse, which sat to the west, which would be the left of the picture, is of course gone, but that is now the addition to the Balls Walker House, which would, so that'd be the back of the Balls Walker House, would be where that greenhouse sat. Moving now a little further to the east to St. Joe and Alabama. This is the Israel Traub building store. It's the oldest surviving commercial structure in the district, built in 1864. Traub was also a painter, but he operated a corner grocery. He lived above. Standard Grocery, which had a few grocery stores in the downtown neighborhood, purchased this in 1922. I want you to note on the side of the building, the ghost sign, it's still there. It's Owl Cigars. And by the way, most people know that this was the Leah Orr Art Studio. She also had, she had her art studio on the first floor. She was a fiber artist. She was, by the way, an ex-nun and an art teacher. So she impacted many, many people. She was a great activist for all of downtown neighborhoods. She lived upstairs. And I know it looks a little sad right now, but that's going to change. The boarding up is because of minimum maintenance standards. But that will go away because the new owner, I understand, is going to follow the same plans that the previous owner was going to do, that took it through the IHBC and the COA process. But anyway, building basically an addition to the back, and I understand they're going to reside in it. But anyway, so not that sad of a story, although it doesn't look so great at the moment. This is just to the south of Leah's building, which you see to the far right. This is this is the Seminole apartment building for seniors today, but it was the Seminole Hotel when it opened its doors in 1914 as a residential hotel for single men. It was nicknamed the Bachelor Hotel. So a pretty stark exterior with a little bit of Art Deco detail up at the top. I want you to note that on the left-hand side of the photograph is the new addition that was added to create the senior apartments, the 55 plus apartments in 1999. We are going to come back to, we're going to revisit that site. I want you to just take note of the addition and where it sits next to the original building. In a couple of slides, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So to the north, going up to St. Joe in Alabama. This is 928 to 940 North Alabama, and it's known as the Pearson Terrace, built in 1901. This may be the finest example of row housing that remains in Indianapolis. As I mentioned, we've got the most stock of row houses in Indianapolis. This is designed in a simplified Queen Anne style. There's 7 units, 2-story brick. It catered to professional single women. And as late as the late 70s, a brothel was at least at the corner unit. It was kind of the red light district back then. So I'm showing you 2 houses. These are the only two relocated houses in our neighborhood. They came from our neighborhood. The one on the left is 311 East 10th Street. That sits directly behind our liquor store at Alabama and 10th. And it was moved from the 200 block on 11th Street. On the right is the Murat House, 1867. That sits at 321 East 10th Street. And I'm going to show you the next slide to show you where this house came from. It sat where the addition to the Seminole is today. All right, so this large Italianate commercial building at 970 Fort Wayne Avenue was home to the Bushman block. So he was a grocer and dry goods in 1870. It's been nicely renovated, retail on the first floor, upper floors are apartments as originally used. Although Bushman basically had his extended family living in the upstairs quarters, not as apartments to the public. This building and the building just to the north, 1010 Central, and I guess I'll just go to that now. It's the Lewis Meyer building. He was a clothing manufacturer. He actually started his building in the Bushman block building, and for a time there was a bridge that connected both buildings at the 3rd floor of the Bushman block building. It was occupied by Central Restaurant Supply for years. And the renovation today as 1010 Central, as an apartment complex, market rate and affordable housing. You will note another building just to the right that sits further back, and that was very intentional. We wanted, as you drove down Central, we did not want the new building to, what's the word I'm looking for? Obscure the historic 1010 Central building. And so we were able to move that new building back. We tried for a European courtyard that didn't exactly happen, but at least 1010 Central, the original building, is prime at the corner, and you can't miss it. All right, so we're going to move a little to the north and a little back to the west to Alabama Street, and you are looking at the Apollo at 1101 North Alabama. Its nearly identical twin is the Aurora, and it sits on the backside facing east, facing the opposite direction, but they're companion buildings. It was originally named the Tuttle Terrace for the builder at that time, but the name's changed in the 20s. Unfortunately, it was unsympathetically remodeled in the 1970s with metal replacement doors and a vanilla box. But it's a nice property managed by Van Roy today. Across the street diagonally is the Otis Building, 241 to 251 East 11th Street. It's Italianate frame construction, 5 storefronts, 5 apartments above. It was built, by the way, in 1908. It housed a variety of businesses through the years, a bakery, a grocery, and a drugstore in 1913. I believe it was a Hook's drugstore. It also housed our long-lived coffee house years ago, back in the 90s and the aughts. Missed that coffee shop. That was on the corner. Today it's a hair salon. Moving just a little south on Alabama, and these actually both face each other. So on the left is the Rayford's Flats, Chicago style. So that's 1014 to 1020 North Alabama. And sitting directly across from that is 1013 and 1015 North Alabama. It's an Italianate, and it was originally designed as a double residence. So that was built in 1877. We're going to now make a turn onto 10th Street to the right. And I just going to show you a couple of houses here. There's the 240 East 10th. Is a vernacular 1.5 story cottage that was built circa 1865, and it's a very little house. I've got to show you the next one, 228 East 10th Street. I have a little history on this because this was actually the first house that I had restored in the neighborhood back in 1986-ish. In arriving at the house, the previous owner had been an itinerant photographer. He had since was deceased, but Mr. Baker, he traveled around the city back in those days with either a pony or a donkey, and he would photograph children on it. And then he'd go back and make the prints and sell black and white prints back to the families or the parents. This is a thing that they did back then. I want you to know that the darkroom was housed in the garage that sits on the back of the alley. I had to take all that old darkroom equipment out. And the fun little story is he must have had some wit and humor. There was a stairway down to a basement entry to the basement level. And in the window of the door, the studio was named Universal Studios. So I always love that. So we have our quaint little Civil War cottage this is at 215 and 217 East 10th Street. It was built circa 1855. It really did serve as a double residence, a duplex, if you will, as we would call it today, until the 1960s. It was vacant for at least a decade, quite a while. And it was restored in the 1980s and again in the 90s. And I believe there's another one coming up on it now. Okay, so moving west and across the street on Delaware, 970 Delaware to be exact, is the Marmon House, built in 1921. I do have to confess, I'm sorry, this is not the best photo or photogenic photo of this house. It's a little more sexy than this. It's a great house. But anyway, the Marmon House, this is a Tudor revival, and it replaced the original family house on the site. Daniel Marmon, founder of Indianapolis Light and Power, he was president of Nordyke Marmon. It was a manufacturer of milling machinery and automobiles, and later automobiles. including the famous Marmon Wasp, winning the first Indianapolis 500 race in 1911. And it was driven by Ray Haroon, an engineer for the company. So I thought that was a great little history here in the neighborhood. The University Club of Indianapolis purchased the house in 1940. They are still active today. It is a preeminent social organization in Indianapolis since its founding in 1898 under the guidance of our former US President Benjamin Harrison. (1101) North Delaware. So we're going up just a little north to just before you get to the interstate. The Fishback, Vonnegut, Annis House, 1875. 1101 North Delaware. It does exhibit Gothic and Queen Anne detailing. A lot of incredible work inside and period parquet floors. William Fishback was a law partner of Benjamin Harrison. And Anton Vonnegut family rented the house in the early 20s. 1940s, R.G. Annis bought the building and basically put in his electrical engineering firm into the building. So it left being a residential to a commercial use. And I have to tell you that Robert painstakingly made sure that they did not damage anything in the inside of that house as a commercial office and building. And so I was able to, with them, by the way, he has since deceased. You may see his name around town. He was a big philanthropist, and you'll see his name on buildings. R.B. Annis. Robert was one of those also world trekkers. He'd come back to neighborhood meetings and show us slides of where he'd been. Anyway, so that was a wonderful building there. So we're going to end with the Wyndham apartment building built in 1929, and that is basically across the street at 1040 North Delaware. So it's just north of the Kemper House. It's a Tudor revival. It's a 7-story apartment building. When it opened with 24 efficiencies and 24 one-bedroom units, it immediately became popular with the single tenants. And I remember before it was renovated, we had friends that lived there that came to our neighborhood meetings. It has since been renovated since then. But this is a nice slide to end on, as the St. Joseph Historic District nomination in 1991 was based on the thematic designation of apartment buildings and flats. So, all right, so this concludes the tour. I thank you for attending. I hope you've all come away with an appreciation for downtown Indianapolis neighborhoods, its history, and its architecture. And I believe we're going to be opening it up to questions.